Chapter 4, From His The Conquest of Happiness, 1930. Boredom as a factor in human behavior has received, in many opinions, far less attention than it deserves. It has been, I believe, one of the great motive powers throughout the historical epoch, and is so at the present day more than ever. Boredom would seem to be distinctively human emotion. Animals in captivity, it is true, become listless, paced up and down, and yawn. But in a state of nature, I do not believe that they experienced anything analogous to boredom. Most of the time, they are on the lookout for enemies, or food, or both. Sometimes they are mating, sometimes they are trying to keep warm. But even when they are unhappy, I do not think that they are bored. Possibly anthropoid apes may resemble us in this respect, as in so many others, but having never lived with them, I have not had the opportunity to make the experience. One of the essentials of boredom consists in the contrast between present circumstance and some other more agreeable circumstances which force themselves irresistibly upon the imagination. It is also one of the essentials of boredoms that one's faculties must not be fully occupied. Running away from enemies who are trying to take one's life is, I imagine, unpleasant, but certainly not boring. A man would not feel bored while he was being executed unless he had almost superhuman courage. In like manner, no one has ever yawned during his maiden speech in the House of Lords, with the exception of the late Duke of Devonshire, who was reverenced by their lordships in consequence. Boredom is essentially a thwarted desire for events, not necessarily present ones, but just occurrences such as will enable the victim of any to know one day from another. The opposite of boredom in a word is not pleasure, but excitement. The desire for excitement is very deep-seated in human beings, especially in males. I suppose that in the hunting stage it was more easily gratified than it has been since. The chase was exciting, war was exciting, courtship was exciting. A savage will manage to commit adultery with a woman while her husband is asleep beside her, knowing that it is instant death if the husband wakes. This situation, I imagine, is not boring. But with the coming of agriculture, life began to grow dull, except, of course, for the aristocrats who remained and still remain in the hunting stage. We hear a great deal about the tedium of machine minding. But I think the tedium of agriculture by old-fashioned methods is at least as great. Indeed, contrary to what most philanthropists maintain, I should say that the machine age has enormously diminished the sum of boredom in the world. Among wage earners, the working hours are not solitary, while the evening hours can be given over to a variety of amusement that were impossible in an old-fashioned country village. Consider again the change in lower middle-class life. In old days, after supper, when the wife and daughters had cleared away the things, everybody sat around and had what was called a happy family time. This meant that pater familias went to sleep, his wife knit, and the daughters wished they were dead or at Timbuktu. What is Timbuktu? At Timbuktu. Daughters wished they were dead or at Timbuktu. They were not allowed to read or to leave the room because the theory was that at that period their father conversed with them, which must be a pleasure to all concerned. With luck, they ultimately married and had a chance to inflict upon their children a youth as dismal as their own had been. If they did not have luck, they developed into old maids, perhaps ultimately into decayed women, fate as horrible as any that savages have bestowed upon their victims. All this weight of boredom should be borne in mind in estimating the world of 100 years ago. And when one goes further into the past, the boredom becomes still worse. Imagine the monotony of winter in a medieval village. People could not read or write. They had only candles to give them light after dark. The smoke of their own fire filled the only room that was not bitterly cold. Roads were practically impassable, so that one hardly ever saw anybody from another village. I must have been boredom. It must have been boredom as much as anything that led to the practice of witch hunts as the sole sport by which winter evenings could be enlivened. It must have been boredom as much as anything that led to the practice of witch hunters. We are less bored than our ancestors were, but we are more afraid of boredom. We have come to know, or rather to believe, that boredom is not part of the natural lot of man, but can be avoided by a sufficiently vigorous pursuit of excitement. Girls nowadays earn their own living very largely because this enables them to seek excitement in the evening and to escape the happy family time that their grandmothers had to endure. Everybody who can lives in a town in America, those who cannot have a car or at the last a motorcycle to take them to the movies. And of course, they have the radio in their houses. Young men and women, young men and young women meet each other with much less difficulty than was formerly the case. And every housemaid expects at least once a week as much excitement as would have lasted at June Austen heroine throughout a whole novel. Heroine. As we rise in the social scale, the pursuit of excitement becomes more and more intense. Those who can afford it are perpetually moving from place to place, carrying with them as they go gaiety, dancing and drinking, but for some reason, always expecting to enjoy this more in a new place. Those who have to earn a living get their share of boredom of necessity in working hours, but those who have enough money to be freed from the need of work have as their ideal a life completely freed from boredom as their ideal life. It is a noble ideal, and far be it from me to decry it. But I am afraid that, like other ideals, it is more difficult to achievement than the idealists suppose. After all, the morning are boring in proportion as the previous evenings were amusing. There will be middle age, possibly even old age. At 20, men think that life will be over at 30. 30. I, at the age of 58, can no longer take that view. Perhaps it is as unwise to spend one's vital capital as one's financial capital. Perhaps some element of boredom is a necessary ingredient in life. A wish to escape from boredom is natural indeed. Races of mankind have displayed it as opportunity occurred. When savages have first tasted liquor at the hands of the white man, they have found at last an escape from the age-old tedium, and except when the government has interfered, they have drunk themselves into a righteous death. Righteous death. They have drunk themselves into a righteous death. Wars, pogroms, and persecutions. Wars, pogroms, and persecutions have all been part of a flight from boredom. Even quarrels with neighbors have been found better than nothing. Boredom is therefore a vital problem for the moralist, since at least half the sins of mankind are caused by the fear of it. Boredom, however, is not be regarded as a wholly evil. There are two sorts, of which one is fructifying, while the other is stultifying. The fructifying kind arises from the absence of drugs, and the stultifying kind from the absence of vital activities. I'm not prepared to say that drugs can play no good part in life whatsoever. There are moments, for example, when an opiate will be prescribed by a wise physician, and I think this moment more frequent than prohibitionists suppose. But the craving for drugs is certainly something which cannot be left to the unfettered operation of natural impulse. And the kind of boredom which the person accustomed to drugs experience when deprived of them is something for which I can suggest no remedy except time. Now what applies to and the kind of boredom which the person accustomed to drugs experiences when deprived of them, and the kind of boredom which the person accustomed to drugs experiences when deprived of them is something for which I can suggest no remedy except time. Now what applies to drugs applies also within limits to every kind of excitement. A life full of excitement is an exhausting life, in which continually stronger stimuli are needed to give the thrill that has come to be thought an essential part of a pleasure. A person accustomed to too much excitement is like a person with a morbid craving for pepper, who comes at last to be unable even to taste a quantity of pepper that which would cause anyone else to choke. There is an element of boredom which is inseparable from the avoidance of too much excitement. And too much excitement not only undermines the health but dulls the palate for every kind of pleasure, substituting titillation substituting scintillations for profound organic satisfactions, cleverness for wisdom, and jagged surprises for beauty. I do not want to push to extremes to I do not want to push the I do not want to I do not want to I don't I don't I don't wanna I don't wanna push to extremes to I don't wanna push to I don't wanna to I don't wanna push to I don't wanna to I don't wanna push to extremes the objection to excitement. A certain amount of it is wholesome, but like almost everything else, the matter is quantitative. Too little Too little may produce morbid cravings, too much will produce exhaustion. A certain part of enduring boredom is therefore essential to a happy life. A certain power of endure boredom. A certain power of enduring boredom is therefore essential to a life. A certain part of enduring boredom is therefore essential to a happy life, and is one of the things that ought to be taught to the young. All great books certain all great books certain all great books contain boring portions, and all great lives have contained under uninteresting stretches. Imagine a modern American publisher confronted with old statements as a new manuscript submitted to him for the first time. It is not difficult to think what his comments would be, for example, on the genealogy. My dear sir, he would say, this chapter lacks pep. You can't expect your reader to be interested in a mere string of proper names of persons about whom you tell him so little. You have begun your story, you will admit in final style, and at first I was very favorably impressed, but you have altogether too much wish to tell it all. Pick out the highlights, take out the superfluous matter, and bring me back your manuscript when you have reduced it to a reasonable length. So the modern publisher would speak, knowing the modern reader's fear of boredom. He would say that the same sort of thing about the Confucian classics, the Koran, Marx's Capital, and all the other sacred books which have proved to be bestsellers. He would say the same sort of things, blah blah, nor does this apply only to sacred books. All the best novels contain boring passages. A novel which sparkles from the first page to the last is pretty sure not to be a great book. Nor have the lives of great men been exciting except at a few great moments. Socrates could enjoy a banquet now. Banquet. Socrates could enjoy a banquet now and again, and must have derived considerable satisfaction from his conversations while the hemlock was taking effect. But most of his life he lived quietly with. What is that? Taking a constitutional in the afternoon, and perhaps meeting a few friends by the way. Kant is said never to have been more than 10 miles from Königsberg in all his life. Darwin, after going round the world, spent the whole of the rest of his life in his own house. Marx, after starting up a few revolutions, decided to spend the remainder of his days in the British Museum. Altogether, it will be found that a quiet life is characteristic of a great man, and that their pleasures have not been of the sort that would look exciting to the outward eye. So great achievement is possible without persistent work. No great achievement is possible without persistent work, so absorbing and so difficult that little energy is left over for the more strenuous kinds of amusement, except such as serve to recuperation physical energy during holidays, of which alpine climbing may serve as the best example. Alps? The capacity to endure a more or less monotonous life is one which should be acquired in childhood. Modern parents are greatly to blame in this respect. They provide their children with far too many passive amusements, such as shows and good things to eat, and they do not realize the importance to a child of having one day like another, except, of course, for somewhat rare occasions. The pleasures of childhood should, in the main, be such as the child extracts from his environment by means of some efforts and inventiveness. Pleasures which are exciting and at the same time involve no physical exertion, such for example as the theater, should occur very rarely. The excitement is in the nature of a drug, of which more and more will come to be required, and the physical passivity during the excitement is contrary to instinct. A child develops best when, like a young plant, he is left undisturbed in the same soil. Too much travel, too much variety of impressions are not good for the young and cause them as they grow up to become incapable of enduring fruitful monotony. Wow. Fruitful monotony? Fruitful monotony. Paradoxical. Hmm. I do not mean that monotony has any merits of its own. I mean only that certain good things are not possible except where there is a certain degree of monotony. Take, say, Wordsworth's Prelude. Wordsworth, Wordsworth's Prelude. It will be obvious to every reader that whatever had any value in Wordsworth's thoughts and feelings would have been impossible to apply sophisticated urban young youth. A boy or young man who has some serious constructive purpose will endure voluntarily a great deal of boredom if he finds that it is necessary by the way. But constructive purposes do not easily form themselves in a boy's mind if he is living a life of distractions and dissipation. But constructive purposes do not easily form themselves in a boy's mind if he is living a life of distractions and dissipations. Hmm. For in that case, his thoughts will always be directed toward the next pleasure rather than towards the distant achievement. For all these reasons, a generation that cannot endure boredom will be a generation a little of men unduly divorced from the slow processes of nature, of men in whom every vital impulse slowly withers, as though they were cut flowers in a vase. I do not like mystical language and yet hardly knows how to express what I mean without employing phrases that sound poetic rather than scientific. Whatever we may wish to think, we are creatures of earth. Our life is part of the life of the earth, and we draw our nourishment from it just as the plants and animals do. The rhythm of earth life is slow. Autumn and winter are essential to it as spring and summer. Mm. The rhythm of Earth's life is slow. Autumn and winter, spring, summer are essential to it as spring and summer. Essential and winter are as essential to it as spring and summer. The rest is as essential as motion. To the child, even more than to the man, it is necessary to preserve some contact with the ebb and flow of terrestrial life. The human body has been adapted through the ages to this rhythm, and religion has embodied something of it in the festival of Easter. I have been a boy of 2 years old who had been kept in London, taken out of the first time to walk in green country. The season was winter, and everything was wet and muddy. To the adult eye, there was nothing to cause delight, but in the boy, there sprang up a strange ecstasy. He kneeled in the wet ground and put his face in the grass, and gave utterance to half accurate crisis of delight. Oh my God, articulate. And gave utterance to half articulate cries of delight. The joy that he was experiencing was primitive, simple, and massive. The organic need that was being satisfied is so profound that those in whom it is starved are seldom completely sane. The organic need that was being satisfied is so profound that those in whom it is starved are seldom completely sane. Many pleasures of which we may take gambling as a good example have in them no element of this contact with earth. Such pleasures, in the instant when they seize, leave a man feeling dusty and dissatisfied, hungry for he knows not what. Hungry for he knows not what. Such pleasures bring nothing that can be called joy. Those, on the other hand, that bring us into contact with the life of earth, have something in them profoundly satisfying. When they seize the happiness that they brought remains. Although their intensity while they existed may have been less than that of a more exciting dissipation. Although their intensity while they existed may have been less than that of a more exciting dissipations. The distinction that I have in mind runs through the whole gamut, from the simplest to the most civilized occupations. The 2-year-old boy whom I spoke of a moment ago displayed the most primitive possible form of union with the life of earth. But in a higher form of the same thing is to be found in poetry. What makes Shakespeare's lyrics supreme is that they are filled with this same joy that made the 2-year-old embrace the grace. Consider, hark, hark the lark, or come unto this yellow sands. You will find in these poems two civilized expression of the same emotion that in our 2-year-old could only find utterance in inarticulate crisis. Or again, consider the difference between love and mere sex attraction. Love is an expression in which our whole being is renewed and refreshed, as is that of plants by rain after drought. In sex intercourse without love, there is nothing of it. When the momentary pleasure is ended, there is fatigue, disgust, and a sense that its life is hollow. Love is part of life of earth. Sex without love is not. The special kind of boredom from which modern urban populations suffer is ultimately intimately bound up with their separation from the life of earth. It makes life hot and dusty and thirsty, like a pilgrimage in the desert. Among those who are rich enough to choose their way of life, the particular brand of unendurable boredom from which they suffer is due, paradoxically as this may seem, to their fear of boredom. In flying from the fructifying kind of boredom, they fall a prey to the other far worse kind. A happy life must be, to a great extent, a quiet life. For it is only in an atmosphere of quiet that true joy can live.